Hello students, welcome to the next video lecture on die casting.
So die casting process is again a permanent mold casting process in which the molten materials injected into the mold cavity under high pressure. In the previous casting process, we will pour the molten material into the mold cavity. Whereas in this casting process, we will pressurize the molten material in the mold. So since the mold is made up of some metallic material and it is called as a die, the complete process is called as a die casting. Right? So we have to design the mold very carefully. So it has to fulfill the process of holding and close the two halves accurately and keep them closed throughout the casting process. And after completing the casting process, it have to open constantly to remove the part. Right? So this is the main requirement of a die casting process. You can able to see this is the mold, right? So this one mold will be fixed and another mold will be movable, right? So we will move and we will close this die and we will pour the mold. We will pressurize the molten material inside that and we will let to solidify. So these are the few examples of a die casting process. So what is the difference between this die casting process and other casting process? Hope we have know the difference between the sand casting and process and centrifugal casting process. So this die casting also comes under permanent mold casting, right? So the mold which was used in this process is also non-disposable. We can use it for n number of times, right? So instead of pouring that molten material into the mold cavity, we will pressurize this molten material inside the die, right? That means the mold. So this die refers to the steel mold created in the shape of a product what we are going to be make. Suppose we want to make some cubic one, means the die should be in the cubical form, right? Our die should be in the cubical form. So like that we have to make the die of the replicates of our pot. That means how the pattern is made, no? So like that we have to make this die. So the major difference between this die casting and other two castings are, the one is where we are going to pressurize the molten material instead of pouring, and the second one is the die is made up of a molten material rather than the sand or any refractive materials. So this is the difference between the sand, centrifugal and die casting. So these are the parts which was made using the die casting. So mostly this type of a casting process is used to make some automobile components. So the automobile components like the engine casing, you can able to see this is the engine casing and this is a clutch housing, right? And this is a propeller housing. So like that mostly it is used in the automobile applications. So the disadvantage, there will be some advantages and disadvantages for this process. So coming to the advantages, and this is easy for the mass production, and the dimensional stability and the dimensional accuracy for this process is very high. And definitely there will be a no secondary operations like machining and finishing like sand casting or centrifugal casting. And the part which was obtained using this casting process will possess strength, good strength and the weight, right? And when compared to the other two process. Coming to the disadvantages, all the metals and alloys cannot be used in this process. So the initial cost, that means the cost of a machines, dies and other equipments is very high when compared to the another process. And also it is not cheap to start with a single quantity production. That means if you want to produce a production quantity of some 100 quantity or some 10 quantities or 20 quantities, you should not select this type of a casting process because the initial investment is very high and it is very suitable for the mass production, not for a batch or not for a small quantity of a production. So that when your production quantity is very low, you can select either a sand casting process or a centrifugal casting process. You should not go for the die casting process since the equipment cost is very high. And the special precautions are necessary to evacuate the air or hot air from the die cavities, other than it will cause some porosity in the casting pot. So you know that while we are using the molten material, it will produce some hot air or a gas, right? So we supposed to evacuate from our mold. In the sand mold, due to that grain size, it will easily evacuate the hot air or gas from the mold cavity, right? So likewise in centrifugal casting also we can easily remove the hot air, where in this process it is completely coarse and it is not made up of any sand. So the mold cavity is made up of a metal, so there should be some special attachment to evacuate this hot air from the die. So these are the few disadvantages. So what are the material which can be casted using this process means? So mostly this process is applicable for both ferrous and non-ferrous material, and this is specifically for zinc, copper, aluminum, magnesium, lead, tin based alloys are commonly used. So that means from this material you can able to see this is very good process for low melting point materials. So this is also have two types. One is hot chamber die casting, and another one is cold chamber die casting. So we can see detailing about these two casting process. Coming to the hot chamber die casting process. So here, so this is the arrangement of a hot chamber die casting. You can able to see it will have some pool or container. So where the material is put into it, and using the furnace we are going to melt the material and make it into the molten state, right? And we will have some hydraulic cylinder arrangement with some plunger and with some tube arrangements, which tube is getting into the die cavity, right? So this die in the open position, closed position, right? So the cycle starts like this, right? So initially you will put some solid material, and using this furnace it will made into the liquid material. That means the state of a material from solid to molten state is converted. After that, this hydraulic cylinder is started, right? So this hydraulic cylinder is extracted and the plunger is moved, right? So while this movement, this liquid material is injected into the die, right? So towards the process, this hydraulic cylinder will supply the constant pressure, and it is constantly supply the molten material into this die cavity, right? So here your molten material will be filled. So it is let for some time to solidify. After that the pressure is removed, right? So the pressure is removed and the two dies is removed, right? So then the final part will be taken out. So this is the final part. So this is the hot chamber die casting. In the hot chamber die casting, you will have a furnace. That means the material pool where you will directly supply the material from the mold pool to the die instead of pouring. So coming to the advantage, this is very suitable for a high production rate and convenience of melting the material, right? So there is no need of any external melting sources. And also this process also don't require any secondary operations like machining and finishing, such as in the sand or centrifugal casting. But the limitations, this process is very suitable for the low melting point materials, and also aluminum cannot be used in this process because usually this aluminum will be oxidized. When you are keeping this aluminum with any other material, there will be some reaction due to the atmospheric oxygen. So that this aluminum cannot be used because it picks up some iron. That means it will take some ferrous from the total structure in the while it is melting in the pool. Coming to the cold chamber die casting. So instead of plunging that hot material from the mold pool, here what we will do, we will pour that molten material inside the cylinder, right? Other process are same. So the molten material is poured into the unheated chamber, right? So this is the unheated chamber from the external melting container. You will have a furnace outside of this setup, and we will make down the molten material, and using this ladle we will pour into the unheated chamber, right? So we will constantly pour this molten material into the chamber, and again this cylinder will give some pressure using this plunger, right? What this plunger will do means it will extract the, it will pour, it will send this molten material into the die, right? So and this molten material will fill in the die, and it led for some solidification, right? So after the solidification, this die is removed, right? So this die is removed, and we can able to get this finished part. So in the previous process also, you can able to see two pins are there, right? So this is the two pins, okay? So these are the pins. So this pins is called as a ejector pin. As I said before in the first slide itself, so it has to hold and close two halves accurately, right? So to make this, we need some pins like this ejector pins. So the purpose of this ejector pin is used to eject the material. So they eject the casted part once the process is completed, and it has to hold the two dies accurately and perfectly while the casting process. Just think there is some offset, right? So there is some offset like this, then the part quality and the part dimension will be proper. So after the casting process, definitely not, right? So there will be some offset, and your part won't be good, right? So that we have to maintain the exact holding, so that we will have some pins called ejector pin and the holding pin. So coming to the advantage and disadvantages, and this is very economical for the large production quantities, and also the surface and the dimensional accuracy is very good, and this is very suitable for thin section production. Coming to the disadvantages, this is a very slower process because we need some external melting source. You have to transfer the molten material from the external source to this chamber, and you have to pour. So it is a time consuming process, and generally they are limited to the metals with very low material. So in the previous types also, it is very suitable for low melting process. So coming to that, so the whole die casting process is very limited to the low melting temperature. So that means zinc, aluminum. So such kind of a material can be used in this process instead of any cast or something else. So okay, this casting process is very peculiar because the preparation of mold is very distinct when compared to the other two process. In other two process, we will have some sand or something else to make the mold, and we will reuse that. And in centrifugal casting, we will have some mixed one where it is a permanent mold process. In this casting process, the entire mold is made up of a steel material or some of the metallic material. So usually this is made up of a tool steel, mold steel, or maraging steel, right? So the mold in this process is made up of tool steel, mold steel, or maraging steel. If suppose you want to make a part with the cast steel or cast iron, that means the molten material is made up of cast steel or cast iron, you have to use tungsten or molybdenum as a mold material, that means die material, right? So always this ejector pin requires to remove the part when it is open, right? So the purpose of ejector pin is to hold two dies, and also it has to eject the material after the casting process is done. So before and after each casting process, you have to lubricate the machine. So lubricate the die. So then only it can easily remove the part from the dies. So these are the properties of a die or mold of sand casting. Coming to the summary. So in this video, we have seen two types of casting process. One is hot chamber casting process, another one is cold chamber casting process. In hot chamber casting process, the material is plunged inside. In the cold chamber process, we have poured the dye.